Hi guys, so today I'm filming my February wrap-up. This month I read 17 books, which is almost all of my Goodreads goal. My Goodreads goal for the year is 24, so I've read 17 this month alone. I am almost completed with it, so I did a pretty good job this month. This is going to be quite a long video, I think, because I got some reviews to give you, so I'm going to just jump straight into it. The first book that I read in February was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book is written beautifully. However, I gave it a 2 stars, and I think that was maybe pushing it. The more I think about it, the more it's probably a 1 or a 1.5. This book is about 2 people who are destined to partake in a game, and my first complaint about the book is I didn't understand the game. It's set in the setting of a circus, and it's a circus that only operates by night. They're destined to fight with each other in magical terms, but they never actually fight one-on-one. This book was so confusing. When you see my thoughts, you'll understand why I don't get what this book is about. And but yeah, the setting is beautiful. But that's as much as I know about this book. The good things about this book were the writing style, of course. Everybody likes the writing style in this book. However, I think I prefer a less flowery writing style, but I can admit that it was beautifully written. Also, between the story, there were like pages where it talked about you being in the circus. So it said, you have found this tent, or you have done that, and there was no relation to the story really, but it was absolutely lovely to read those things. I found them very captivating, and I thoroughly enjoyed those moments reading about feeling like you were part of the story. Very interesting, something I haven't really seen that often. I enjoyed that part. The parts that I didn't love about this book were I think they were very overhyped. I didn't understand the book. There was no plot line to it, and it felt forced. It felt like an excuse to write a book. I don't understand how everyone can love this, because to me it was a waste of time. I feel the overly pretty writing distracted completely from the story. I think she put too much effort into writing for writing than she did to make a story complete and enjoyable. The story is a basic story. The characters are very underdeveloped. I have no attachment to these characters whatsoever. I don't even remember their name. And it's been 1 month and I don't remember their names. That's not great. I never rooted for the romance within the story. I don't understand why there was a romance. There was no development of that romance. It just happened out of all nowhere. They were just romance. It was very unbelievable, and I felt the ending of this book was such a cop-out. It was, usually even with a bad book, I find myself captivated to keep reading, and then by the end I'm like, oh hang on, this wasn't a great book. This book was so hard to pick up. I started this at the end of January, and it took me days and days and days to get into it. It took me like 3 days to read 50 pages, which never happens. So on February 1st, I just had to sit down and read the whole thing, or I knew I would never pick it up again. And I'm so glad I did it, because it just got it me over and done with. But it did start February off on a really, really bad note with this slow-paced, boring, underwhelming and overhyped book. Very sorry, fans, don't come for me. Clearly not a great start of the month. But I'm glad I read it and I'm done with it. I have this beautiful Waterstones edition that I refuse to get rid of, even though I don't like it. So I need to keep the book now. The second book that I read in February was All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda. I gave this book a 4-star rating. This book was about a woman who left her hometown when she was 16 after her best friend went missing. The book starts where she has to return to her town and essentially face the fact that she doesn't want to return there, and she's haunted by the thoughts of her missing friend and what has happened to her and the day that she went missing. It goes through all the journey of meeting all the people she used to know, all the suspects, all the people she thinks it could be. It's not really a detective story. It's just more of a girl wanting to find her friend, but not trying to find a friend. She just... It's very hard to explain. The main drama of the story is essentially that something happens while she's back at the town, but you don't know what that thing is, and it's flashing back. So the first chapter you read is 15 days before. Next chapter is 14 days, and you go down to the day before and then the day that it happens. And going back through that, you know things that have happened that haven't happened. It is just very, very confusing, and I found that way too hard to follow because it sounds simple, but the characters were knowing things that we didn't know, and the characters weren't knowing things that we did know, and I just found it very, very overwhelming. However, this book had an unexpected ending. It was my first thriller in a long time, so I think I was more impressed than most people who read thrillers often would be but I still thought it was good. I thought it was very, very page turning. I was constantly wanting to read more. I read it in one sitting, which I did actually with a lot of these books. I thought it was really, really good. It gave me the chills during suspenseful moments. That rarely happens to me with a thriller. I'm kind of just reading it like, hey, yeah, that's drama. But this book gave me chills. I was sat there tingling all over thinking, oh my goodness. I think that helps that it was a really gradual build up to the climax, which some people would say slow paced, but I didn't think this book was slow paced. I thought it was essential. I thought you were left in suspense all the time thinking, well, who is that? And it led you off tangents that you thought would be the story, and then it brought you back and you were like, ooh, okay. The thing that I didn't like about this book, aside from the told backwards aspect, was the fact that I really did not like the protagonist in this story. She was so unlikable, so frustrating, and so annoying. March, I want no unlikable protagonist because I'm sick of them. Apart from that is the only reason this book wasn't a 5-star for me. If you're a really hardcore thriller reader, this might not be the best thriller you've ever read, but I really am enjoying an introduction to thrillers a bit more. The next couple of books that I read were actually a trilogy, and that is the Chaos Walking trilogy. So the first book is The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. This book is about a boy named Todd who lives in Apprentice Town and is on another world. It is a dystopian, and on this world there is this germ that when men catch the germ, their thoughts become everybody's thoughts. So their thoughts become loud. You can read each other's minds. Their noise is called their noise. So one day Todd is going to fetch apples for his family and he can hear a lack of noise, which is very hard to wrap your head around, but it's just like an absence of noise. So it sounds like something because he's so used to the noise. So in this absence of noise, he goes looking for it and stuff happens, blah, blah, blah. The story continues, and then he goes back and he finds out this lack of noises. And then he goes on this adventure with the girl Viola, and they're on the run, and that's what the whole book is about, them being on the run. This book was a 4-star initially, and then the more I sat and thought about it, the more it became a 3-star. I think the writing style of this is lovely, and the audiobook narrator of all of these books is really, really great. He has such a captivating voice. He's not monotone. Ooh, sorry about the reflection. He is not monotone in any way. He's really, really great. This story also evoked a lot of emotion from me. I felt constantly attached to the characters. I wanted them to succeed. I was like, oh my goodness, you know, this, and this. You really do feel a roller coaster going through this book. But I do have a lot of critiques. I felt that this was really slow paced. However, this is not a negative for me because I felt that this book was so necessary of being slow paced to develop the world in the way it did. You know what the world is like. You know every character in detail. The ending of this book was a cliffhanger, which I hate. That is something I really don't like in books. Even if it is a series, don't leave me on the worst cliffhanger known to man. Like, give me a cliffhanger that's like, I've got some answers from this book, it was worth my read, but a cliffhanger that, you know, oh, well, now I want to read the next book. That's fine, but this book was a complete cliffhanger. It answered nothing within the book. You had to read the next book. And it's like, well, now the whole book felt pointless to me. It was okay because I have the rest of the series here ready, so I just picked it up straight away. But it didn't change the fact that I was severely annoyed by the situation. Todd, the main character in this book, was so unlikable. I really don't like him. And the other main character that becomes more of a main character within the rest of the books, Viola, I don't like her either. I really don't like them. I think they're annoying, they're stuck up, they're rude. They seem to think the world revolves around them, which I guess actually it does, so never mind. But they think they can do anything, and it's like, you can't, you're just 2 teenagers, please stop. There is a death in this book that makes me want to die inside. Nothing will prepare you for the crushings you receive in this book. This book mainly, not the rest of the series. The deaths. There's one death that, yeah, thinking about it upsets me. Like, yes, it was a 3-star, but it was definitely very emotion evoking, and yeah, it'll hold a dear place in my heart. Then we're going on to the second book, which is The Ask and the Answer. This book went down from a 3-star to a 2-star, which you will see is a theme in this series. Very disappointing. This book is now told in a split perspective, which we didn't have in the first book. So now we are seeing from both Todd's story and Viola's side of the story. I did feel this was very necessary. I don't really care for split POVs in a story unless it is necessary, and I did think it was necessary in this because of where they are and what they are experiencing. This book contains a lot of politics, love, war. It was filled with so many themes that made it very fast-paced. So I was saying about the first book being really slow-paced, although necessary. This one, complete opposite. I was strangling for information because it was just going everywhere. But that's better if you prefer a fast-paced book. The problem is with this book was that I had no care for the romance. There was, once again, like the Night Circus, I just felt no connection. I thought that they were just a bit meh. Considering the characters are so well developed, you'd think you'd want the romance, but no, I don't want the romance. I'd rather it be platonic friendship, because the romance feels forced, unnecessary. I don't see why it's in there. Not for me anyway. I'd rather a platonic friendship. The ending of this book also, not a cliffhanger, well, it is a cliffhanger, but it also makes the whole book feel like a waste of time. It's so pointless, so frustrating, and I cannot cope with how annoyed I was reading this book. I cannot cope. The end chapter, I was just like, kill me off, because it's not worth my time. The thing is, you get this other perspective of Viola, who I said I wasn't fussed on. Well, now in this book, I hate her. For some reason, I wanted the main character to die. I was constantly like, oh, can we just kill her off now, please? Every time something happened, I was like, oh, please let her die. Please. Because I can't cope anymore. I don't want to listen to her. And the narrator says her voice. I love the narrator of the audiobook, but the way he says her voice, her name, is the most frustrating thing in the entire world. Also, there was a new setting to this that was completely different to the setting of the first book, and I don't think it was developed well enough because of how fast-paced it was. So the first book was such a great world-building experience. You knew everything about the world, but then you get to this place which is it's not a new world, it's the same world, but it's a new setting in the world, and you know nothing about it. The way I was thinking about it was in the Maze Runner, where they've got like the maze and the walls. I was kind of thinking of it as like the glade with the walls, but I don't think that's what you're meant to think of it at all. But I was trying to make up my own settings so that I could try and relate to this book a bit more, and I couldn't. It just didn't work for me. Then I read the final book in the series, Monsters of Men. I can't say I read this book because I actually DNF'd it at 163 pages, I think it was. And I decided I was no longer continuing with this because it was a 1-star. However, I felt the need to put it in this wrap-up because I read 163 pages, which is essentially a short book. And because I'd read the other two, I felt the need to put this in. However, I don't want to do a full review because I didn't read the full book and I think that would be unfair. The only thing I'd say about this is the audiobook. There's a new perspective, a third perspective, that you're not supposed to know who it is. I did because I read a Goodreads spoiler, so even though I never actually found out who it is, I know who it is. And I think it was the most annoying and unnecessary perspective. This whole book is about the same thing. Well, for 163 pages, we were on the same day for the whole time doing the same. There was a war. It's a war, basically. And the whole 163 pages is still the first day of the war. I need a minute. You go through circles after circle after circle with this book. I'm so sick of reading the same thing. I hate DNF in books, especially when you've gone through 2 books in a series to get to this one. But it's the longest book, and I don't care if it becomes one of the best books in the entire world. I am not reading more than 162 pages worth of war, and it clearly was not ending anytime soon. So unnecessary. It was a little bit graphic, which didn't bother me too much. I've read worse, but I do feel it was a bit of a catfish when the other 2 books were not graphic in any way, shape or form, and then you got to this one and it was a little bit like, oh, people are set on fire and it talks about their burning flesh and a lot worse, and I just thought, not sure how I feel about that. I may go back to it at some point. You know, I own the books, but I'm also thinking of just unhauling them and cutting my losses. The next book that I read was Hansen, Apprentice, Hairdresser by Patricia Baldwin. I don't think many of you will know about this book. This is such an underrated book. This was published in 1963. This is a first edition, which I love. Look at this. It's about a girl who has just left school and she wants to know what she wants to do with her life. And so her friend down the local, I don't know what you call it, the local coffee shop, but it's also like a disco club. I don't know. She speaks to her friend and she says, well, I'm a hairdresser. Why don't you do a hairdressing course? And she was saying, well, it's too expensive. She said, no, this person's taking on Apprentice and you can do it for free, work your way up. blah blah blah. And so she goes, and funnily enough, like the cover suggests, she becomes a hairdresser, an apprentice. But it also just revolves around her life and her dad being away at sea, and her brother going through a hard time in his life and then turning to religion. You know, it's quite a simple book. It's like really, really short as well. So if you just want a quick read, you know, it's nice. I think it's 122 pages. So you could read this in no time at all. This is a really great book for getting out of a reading slump. If you're feeling about reading, just try and give this a go if you can find a copy somewhere or PDF. And the ending's happy. What more does anybody want? The next book that I read was The Binding by Bridget Collins. This book is about a boy who is really sick, and then he gets summoned by a binder to be her apprentice, to become a binder himself. This book is split into 3 parts. It's really difficult to explain. The first part about it is about him going to a binder's shop and learning how to be a binder, finding out what it means, what a book is in this world. The second part is a bit of a love story, and it goes through, I can't give too much away, but it goes through this love story, like I'm reminiscing. It's like it's a flashback to a love story. And then the third part is the climax of the book. This book had a fascinating plot, and it was very original. I thought that a book about books, what more could you want? It had great LGBT representation, had an enemy to lovers trope, which I love. It's a personal favourite of mine. But it just fell flat. It was a 3-star for me. It just fell completely flat, and I just thought it was a bit meh. With the book being split into 3 parts, I thought the first part was achingly slow and boring. Oh, you couldn't pay me to read that again. Like, it was so slow. The second part was great. It was fascinating. It was exciting. I was hooked onto it. If that bit was just the story, it would have been a 5-star. Loved it. And that's why this book is a 3-star. Otherwise, it would have been a 1. But that second part, I couldn't stop. I loved it. The third part was just more misery and boredom. Can we just make that middle bit a book, please, and just leave it at that, because that was so much better. There are a lot of trigger warnings for this book, including rape, murder, and sexual abuse. I thought this book was definitely overhyped. Like, it wasn't like Starless Sea level, but I feel like a lot of people have talked about this recently, and it's been everywhere. My local Waterstones, they've just got posters everywhere about it, and I'm like, I've got to read this. And I wish I hadn't read this. I wish I just left myself unknowing. I really did have to force my way through it. I'm glad I did though, because that middle bit was worth the read, but the other 2 parts, no, scratch. Waste of time. No point in them being in this book at all. The next book that I read was Radio Silence. This book was about a girl who has a favourite podcast show known as University. The creator of this podcast reaches out to her and asks her to make the art for the podcast, which of course she accepts. But then she finds out she actually knows the creator of the podcast personally, and it develops a friendship from that. This book was a 4-star for me. I thought it was just a really nice read. It had a platonic friendship in it, which is very rare these days to find, which I wish we could find a bit more of, because it's normal. We want some platonic friendships. It had great LGBT representation. It had a biracial protagonist. The representation in this book was just really, really great, and I thought was done really, really well as well. It deals with mental illness in a very sensitive way. It also did a really great job of showing what it was like to be a teenager. Okay, maybe it has some dramatic parts that not many teenagers go through, but it also had the real and raw parts of bullying in school and what it was like to feel like the world was against you, applying to university and going through the application process and being forced to do things you didn't want to do, which you don't get to say very often. And if someone tries to portray a teenage lifestyle, it doesn't work so well. That is something that Alice Oseman seems to do really, really well in her books. She tends to portray teenage life very, very well. I guess that's because she's a younger author. She does that very well. It also showed the toxic side to fandoms, which is a very taboo subject. I was part of the One Direction fandom, and I mean, like, I had the Twitter. I was a stan, as they call them now. They didn't call them that back then. I was obsessed. And no one ever talks about how toxic those fandoms can be, and the bullying and the things that can go on there where people are just crappy people. And I think this book did a really great job of showing that side of fandoms and making you understand that it is not all it cracks out to be. I've never seen that before in any media, not just a book. I've never seen someone talk about it that way. And it made me realise how toxic they can be. Even though I've been part of one, I've never realised the way it affects people. I'm glad she showed it from the perspective of the people who had the fans, as opposed to being a fan. I'm really glad we saw that. The only negative I have about this book, which is why it wasn't a 5-star, was that the ending felt very forced and cliche. I just don't think what happened at the end would really have happened. I just felt it had to be like this. Oh look, this is how everything's going to be made better. We're going to do something that wouldn't really be possible in real life. Let's do it. Let's fix life. Let's make it better. Not really doable for teenagers, I'm afraid. Which made the whole book feel a little bit dampened, because she was going really well on the path of this is all done very right, this is all very accurate, and then did something that was completely opposite of that. But still a really, really great book. The next book that I read was Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This was such a good book. So this is about a woman who has broken up with her boyfriend and has been left with nowhere to live, no money, and so she's couch surfing on her friend's sofa. She then finds an advert for a job where she is a flat sitter. So she lives in this apartment for free, in this glamorous building, in this glamorous apartment that she's known about from a book, and she gets paid to do so. But there is rules in place that she has to follow. And then, obviously it's a thriller, things start to get creepy. This book was a 5-star all the way. What a good book. I think a lot of people will hate that ending, but I did not. I thought it was a really, really good ending. It had very well developed and intriguing characters. There are quite a lot of characters living in this building, and you seem to know quite a lot about most of them. Or even if you only know a small amount about them, it's good detail, you remember them. You also feel completely submerged in the atmosphere. The description of the building was so good. I could imagine every single thing that I could feel myself in every part of this book. I could see everything perfectly. Like the way she talks about that grand staircase circling around that beautiful elevator, and I just think, oh yes, I want to go there and see it for myself. This book was so engrossing and fast paced, and I couldn't stop reading. You trust nobody, which just adds to the suspense of this book. And then when it comes to the ending, well, I don't think anybody could have guessed what was going to happen in that ending. I think a lot of people hate it because it was very dramatic and very far-fetched, I suppose. But I enjoyed it. I thought, if I can't predict an ending, that's great. And this one you definitely could not predict. I would love for someone to have predicted that and let me know how they predicted that, because that is so... You're a genius if you could predict that. I have nothing bad to say about this book. I thought it was incredible. The next book that I read was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. This book is about a boy named Jacob who has a granddad telling him stories from a young age about these peculiar children and the things they can do and monsters that are looking for these children. As Jacob grows up, he realises that the stories are not as true as they thought they were. When Jacob's granddad dies in his arms, his last words make him go and look for the place where his granddad says these peculiar children are. Jacob obviously expects nothing, he just wants to go and live out his granddad's dream as his granddad wanted him to. The first half of the book, incredible. The second half wasn't so in love. I did give this book a 4 stars. But first half of the book, 5-star, thoroughly enjoyed. I thought that the pictures were the best asset to the book. I know a lot of people thought they were a bit forced, but I thought this book was a really great book, and the pictures only helped me understand what he was trying to describe from these peculiar children, because obviously it's quite hard to understand what they would look like. So I thought that the pictures really, really helped with that. The characters are really well developed in the story. I hope to see a little bit more in the future books, as I have not read them yet. Also, the image of the house, as I said, I love world building. The image you are given of this house is so amazing. The book is eerie and creepy. I expected it to be more of a child-friendly book, but I suppose it is, but it's definitely more eerie and creepy than I was giving it credit for. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. I thought that was one of the best parts about this book. However, when we got to the second half, it became very fast-paced and I found it very hard to follow. I think if I was to read it again, I would much better benefit from it. So I think that will be something I would do. It also had a very abrupt ending that left me feeling quite dazed, but not in the way of, oh, it's a cliffhanger, I want to read the next book straight away. It just kind of left me in a state of like, did I like this or not? I'm not entirely sure. So I haven't even gone to pick up the second book yet, which usually I would do straight away. I'm very good at keeping up with my sequels. So that's why I don't know how I feel about this book. I hope it uncovers more of a talent. mild spoiler alert, I guess, mild. Obviously his talent is seeing monsters. Well, if that's all he can do, it's going to be very disappointing for me. So I hope in the future books we uncover talents as maybe they're necessary to the story. That would be good for me because I really think that's a shocking talent. We're almost there. My mouth is in agony. The next book that I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I hope I got that right. This book is about a time traveling cafe where you can go and you can travel back to the past, but you can only do so to meet somebody who has visited the cafe. You have to sit in a specific seat and you have to return before your cup of coffee gets cold. This book was so lovely. I gave it a 5 stars. It was translated from Japanese, which now that I've seen that, I want to try so many more translated works because it just seemed so nice. The culture was lovely in it and it was just a really nice written story, and I've heard that about Japanese translated books. The story was so unique. I've never heard of anything like this before, which is what made me want to pick it up. There's like 4 of these stories in this book that all seem very, very separate, but they actually all link up in the most beautiful way. End message of this story left me in tears. It was so beautiful, and the whole book was beautiful. It was beautifully written, the writing style was amazing. I would love to read more works from them. It was engrossing, it was a really fast read, quite a short book, so, you know, it was a fast read. Also, it's beautiful, like, look at that cover, ooh, I love it. Simple yet beautiful, so definitely will reread this at some point in the future because can't give up on this. The only negative I have to say about this book is that the characters were very flat, and I think that was due to it being a short book. You couldn't have enough time to give away this storyline and character development, but I don't think it detracted from the story in any way because it was still beautiful. The next book that I read was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This book is about a boy named Bod. His parents are murdered by a man named Jack, and he, as a toddler, runs away, wanders down to the local graveyard where he is taken in by ghosts and raised and taught all by these ghosts. I can't give much more away from that without spoiling anything, so that is what you're gonna get from me. I was so excited about this book. It was my most anticipated book of probably the year. It was a 5-star prediction for me. I don't know why, but it's just something special. It felt like something special was gonna come out of this book. And I ended up giving it a 2-star. It was so, so sad. The illustrations between each chapter are beautiful. However, they spoil the chapter ahead. So it doesn't make sense. Like the last chapter, I knew exactly what was going to happen because it spoiled it in the illustration. And you may think, well, that's just a minor spoiler, but I didn't want any spoilers. I didn't want to know what was going to happen or where he was going to go or anything like that. I didn't want to know. So this book discusses history in a really great way that children wouldn't probably know about, which is the history of thieves being hung, witches being burned, and all the innocent women that were burned because they were predicted to be witches, and about how suicide was known as a sin back then, and so you weren't given a proper graveyard. It was very important to discuss things like that. I thought it was really, really nice that they were brought into the story because it wasn't necessary, so it was really, really nice to see it. However, this book was a big disappointment. I don't see how it's a children's book. I could be wrong thinking it was, but I definitely thought it was a children's book. But the murder, for a start, was quite a dramatic story. But it says in the back, it deserves to become a modern classic of children's writing. I think maybe you'd have to tone down the murder a little bit. If I gave this to my 14-year-old sister, she'd probably be a bit scared. It lacked a lot of description of the graveyard, which I was excited about. Like, not many books are set in a graveyard, so let's get some description of it. Let's see what it's about. This book could have done with being a bit bigger, I think, to give that description, because it was necessary, and I felt its loss. The chapters feel very disconnected from each other. One minute we're doing something, the next minute the chapter changes and you're doing something completely different. There was no fluid movement between the chapters. You didn't see how he got somewhere or how he was doing something or why he was doing something. It all felt so confusing to me. There was only one rule that he had to live by, which was no leaving the graveyard, and yet every time he broke that rule there was no repercussions. It was just, we know you're not supposed to leave the graveyard, moves on with life. I would like to see the repercussions happening in the graveyard where his parents are supposed to be punishing him. Which is another complaint I have. He has parents and then a guardian. You don't even speak about the parents once in this book. Like, they're so limited. They're just not there. It's all about the guardian. Well, what's the point of parents then? All you do is sleep there and then you never really speak to them again. When you got to the end, there was no closure. You didn't say goodbye to the characters. Like I said about their mum, but hardly been mentioned. Here's this goodbye with his guardian, and yet just like, oh, bye mum, toodaloo. I don't even think he says goodbye to his dad. I don't think. I couldn't cope with the lack of emotion that seemed to go in this book. It was as if Neil Gaiman didn't care about the characters and therefore didn't care if you cared about the characters. They were just there, sidelined, to never be thought of again. So that was a very big disappointment for me, especially for a 5-star prediction. The next book that I read was To All the Boys I've Loved Before. This has been one I've been wanting to read for quite some time now, and I'm so glad I did. This book is about Lara Jean, and she writes a love letter to every boy that she's ever liked or loved, and she addresses it, she puts it in a box and stores it away, and then from that point on she no longer loves them. It's a way of curbing her feelings until these letters get sent out to the people who they were addressed to, and she has to cover up the way she loves some of them by fake dating one of the boys. And obviously, I'm sure you can all guess what happens, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. We go from there. This book was a 5-star. I had nothing bad to say about it. I loved it. It was such a wholesome book. It has a Korean American protagonist, which always great. That's really great to see because I haven't seen that very often. The characters are very well developed. You see pretty much every character's home life in some way, especially Lara Jean's home life. You know, you get so much detail about that, about her sisters, her father. The detail that goes into that was incredible. It made me feel like I really knew these characters. I really, really loved the Korean culture in this book, because as I said, it's a Korean American protagonist. But I would like to see a little bit more in the next book. I'm hoping to do so because I just found it so interesting. And the characters were really easy to love, probably due to them being so well developed. You did want every character to succeed, especially Lara Jean. You really loved her. She was easy to like, easy to get along with. It also had really great representations of school and teenage emotions. It felt like I was a teenager again reading this, and I was like, oh, everything is the end. Everything is, your life is over. It's all over dramatic. It felt like that. I literally had the suspense in my heart like I did when I was a teenager and I had a crush. The next book that I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Oh, this book. This book is about a woman named Monique who goes to interview Evelyn Hugo, and she says that she wants her to write a book about her life to be published when she dies. So we go through the life of Evelyn Hugo and the 7 husbands she married along the way. This book was incredible. It was a 5-star all the way. I do have some negatives to talk about, but the first thing I must mention is there are a lot of trigger warnings in this book. We're talking sexual assault, domestic abuse, death, suicide, abortion, homophobia, racism. I think I've got them all, but I don't even know. You know, you've got to read trigger warnings before you go into this. There's a biracial protagonist known as Monique, which was really great to see. Even though she's not the focus of the book, you do see parts of her life where Evelyn Hugo is implanting her life through Monique. So Monique's life begins to reflect Evelyn's, which is very interesting. When Evelyn is introduced to you, I was starstruck. Through the pages of a woman you don't know, you felt starstruck. The way she was described, it was fast-paced and engaging. Another read in one sitting. I actually read To All the Boys I Love Before, finish it, and went straight onto this one. I'm thinking, oh, I'll read 50 pages of it, and I couldn't get my head out of it. It was read in one, I couldn't stop. This book handles some serious topics, such as being LGBT in the 80s and how cruel that could be. It was handled really, really well. Through the book, there are newspaper snippets. They were so interesting. They were just a little extra, but they had a lot of information in them. If you didn't read them, you wouldn't have known some of the information that happened in the book that wasn't essential, but it definitely helped. Like, one of the husbands, you saw the update on the husband in the snippets, and I enjoyed those parts. I thought they were a great way of getting information across without having to go into detail and make the story match the information you were getting. This book portrays some serious issues, such as issues that are still existing in Hollywood today. I was a little bit disturbed by certain parts in this book, like it talked about underage girls in marriage or sexual situations, which I did not enjoy myself. I think it does help portray the issues in Hollywood, but for me it made me feel very uneasy and I didn't enjoy that personally, but I can see why it was necessary to the book. Nothing prepares you for the feelings of loss in this book. It's just loss after loss after loss. Oh my goodness, I needed therapy after this book. If you have, I think pretty much everyone's read this book, but if you haven't yet, please give it a go. I'd say this was probably one of my top 10 books of all time. This was such a good book. The next book that I read was What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. This book is about a boy who meets a boy in the post office posting back his ex's stuff, and he thinks the fate has brought them together, but then the boy leaves while a marching band interrupts them, and he has to go for this mission to find the boy again, which takes up half the book. And then when he finds him, it's a series of bad dates and they don't know if they're made for each other. This book, it was a 4, maybe 5 star until the epilogue. I'll get to that. Very angry about it. This book had a really cute development of the romance. This was so fluid to be co-authored. I couldn't tell that 2 people wrote this. The writing styles were so similar that it just worked really, really well. I know that Becky Albertalli has done a couple of co-authored books, and I think that she must do these really, really well, because I've never seen a book be co-authored so well in my life. There is representation of religion in this book and mental illness, which we always love. The side characters in this are also great. You really do love every side character, even though they're not a main part of the story. They are so there and present throughout the story, and you need to know them, and that's really, really great. I loved it. I think it was a 4 star, and then I got to the epilogue and he took it down to a 3 star. I could have taken it down more. I was very angry because that is not the ending I wanted at all. Nope. Very upset about the situation. So maybe if you read this, maybe just don't read the epilogue. I wish I hadn't read the epilogue, genuinely. I wish I just skipped it all together, wasted time. Another big issue I had was I didn't particularly like Ben that much. Ben and Arthur are the main characters in this book. Ben doesn't really do it for me. I think at times he can be a bit of an annoyance. He can be a bit rude. I understand that he was not meant to be as engaged in the relationship as Arthur was at the beginning, but God, try a bit harder, will you? It was so frustrating that I couldn't like him through the rest of the book. There are trigger warnings for this book, by the way. Homophobia and racism, just so you know. Another criticism I had was at times I couldn't tell the characters apart, which is interesting because if it was co-authored by one person writing each character, which I suppose it was, then it is very interesting that I couldn't tell these characters apart. At times I'd be halfway through a chapter and still not know who it is and have to flick back and check. The next book that I read for February, you can tell my voice is gone at this point. My mouth, jaw and everything hurts. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. I'm not going to say much about this book because Harry Potter. If you haven't read Harry Potter, what are you doing with your life? Go and pick up a set. Read Harry Potter. Ooh, look, my Harry Potter. I store all my Harry Potter bookmarks in the back of the books. I've got one for every wand I've bought, so they're all in every book. There's not much to say about Harry Potter. They're always going to be a 5 star for me because it's Harry Potter. I kind of just automatically assume it's a 5 star, and it always ends up being a 5 star. You all know J.K. Rowling. She has issues. She will keep trying to make me hate Harry Potter, and you know what? I will not hate Harry Potter. So if she'd stop trying, that'd be great. I'm not going to go into this book and review it because it's a sequel for a start, so I can't give you much information, and second of all, it's just an amazing... Harry, can you get in the back, please? Thank you. And also, it's just an incredible book. You've all got to read. The final book that I read this month is also Harry Potter related. It is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander and J.K. Rowling, obviously, because J.K. Rowling wrote it. Newt Scamander's fake. This book is just an A to Z guide of all the fantastic beasts in the wizarding world. See, so it's just got J. I actually ended up giving this a 5 star, mainly because there was nothing really to be negative about. It was just an enjoyable book. It was written for charity. But the things I loved about it was, it was narrated, obviously it belongs to Harry Potter, that's kind of the theme. And so it was narrated all the way through with handwritten notes by Harry Potter. So like, let me show you the front. So all the way through you had notes that related to the films and written by Harry. And I thought that was so fascinating. And like in the back, it's just like games they've played during class. Also, the audiobook is narrated by Eddie Redmayne, who does the best job of narration. He plays Newt Scamander in the films, so you recognise his voice. And I'm probably going to read the rest of the Hogwarts Library set now because it was worth it. We're done. We're done. We're done. So after an hour and a half of footage, I am finished. I don't know how long this video is going to be. Hopefully not an hour and a half. Hopefully I'll cut that down to like 20 minutes. We'll see. Yeah, it's probably not, is it? Thank you so much if you are still here. God knows how, because I almost cut off halfway. I was almost gone. But thank you so much for your support. Please give this video a like and comment if you read any of these books, or if you plan on reading any of these books, or if you agree or disagree with any of my comments. Love to hear from you. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.